Thank you all for coming. My name is Peter McCambridge. I'm fiction editor with QC Fiction, which is an imprint of Baraka Books. And I thought I'd take a couple of minutes just at the start to let you know a bit more about what QC Fiction is about and what we're doing, and why we're excited to be doing To See Out the Night by David Clerson, who was translated by Katia Grubisic, of course. We're an imprint of Baraka Books. We got up and running in 2015, 2016, around about then. So I keep saying we're new, but we've been about for 5 or 6 years now. We do 3 books a year. So we try and keep selective, and we partly don't have much of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, we try to be selective about the books we choose, and I think doing 3 books a year keeps us honest. We can't go too far out of our comfort zone, and we have to think carefully about, do we like this book enough to really actually want to do it? And we have 15 or 18 books out in the world now, a couple of which have had a lot of success behind them. And as I said, we're excited to be doing this one by David because it's the second time we've come back to him. One of the very first books we did actually was Brothers by David. That was the second book I wanted to publish with QC Fiction. We got the imprint up and running because I really loved La Fiancée Américaine by Eric Dupont, and I wanted that to be our first book. And we ended up going with Bestiaire by Eric Dupont instead. But then the second book I wanted to do was Brothers by David Frère. And I loved it. I loved it so much the first time I read it in French, and I wanted to do it myself, which often happens when I find a book I really want to publish and I really want to bring into English. Like, I love it so much, I want to translate it myself. But I didn't want to be doing all the translations myself since I'm fiction editor. So as luck would have it, Katia was up for translating it and made a fantastic job of it. And Brothers met with some great success when it came out. It was one of our first books that really got us noticed. It was a National Post Book of the year it came out in 2018, I want to say. And it was a GG finalist, Katia's translation, for one of the best Governor General books in translation of the year. So QC Fiction is all about young authors, young translators, and storytelling. So Brothers was obviously a great fit for that, and that's one of the reasons we came back to See Out the Night, which is a collection of short stories, but which really fits with what we're all about. It's beautifully written, and there's a real story there. Like, as a reader and as a fiction editor, I need characters, I need plot. And that was one of the things we wanted to change when we started QC Fiction, when we got it up and running. I wanted to give a chance to more undiscovered authors who were just starting out, authors. Before we started, I felt a lot of people being published in Canada, translated from French into English. It was the same names, and I wanted to get different names out there, and I wanted them to be translated by different translators who were just starting out in their career, but who were nonetheless really fantastic at what they did and would do a great job of the book. And I wanted to put a good book in their hands, put a lot of time into the publishing process, into editing the translation, and just give the book as best a chance as it could. So, as I say, the reason we chose this book is I feel it's a great fit for QC Fiction. I want the QC Fiction to be a real collection of books. If you know our covers, you'll see they all have similar covers. So if you walk into a bookstore, if you go to our website, you'll see they all belong together. They're all part of a whole. And it's important to me to return to authors we're keen on, to return to authors we've worked before, with translators we've worked before, as well as introducing new stuff too, but to help them be part of the QC Fiction family and to bring out future books. So hopefully this is hopefully this isn't the last book by David or the last translation by Katia we'll be doing. So I've talked for a wee while now. I'm going to hand you over to Katia and David. I'll just introduce them. So David Clerson was born in Sherbrooke, Quebec in 1978, and he lives in Montreal. His first book, Brothers, was also translated by Katia Grubisic for QC Fiction, and it was a finalist for the Governor General's Literary Award for Translation and a National Post Book of the Year. Katia Grubisic is a writer, editor, and translator. She's been a finalist for the A.M. Klein Prize for Poetry, and her collection of poems, What If Red Ran Out, won the Gerald Lampard Award for the Best First Book. She has published translations of works by Marie-Claire Blais, Martine Delvaux, and Stéphane Martelly. Her translation of David's first novel, Brothers, was shortlisted for the Governor General's Award for Translation. So Katia's drinking her wine, but once she's finished drinking her wine, she can ask David a question. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers. Cheers to see out the night. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Robin and Blossom for hosting, and Peter for everything, for bringing David and I together, for calling me a young translator, for all of your editorial attention to this book. Neither of my translations with QC fiction would be what they are without your eagle eyes. So thank you. So David and I thought we would do this really informally and read a little bit, chat a little bit, give you a bit of background about some of the pieces. Because they're short stories, they lend themselves to these kind of snippets, but we don't want to overwhelm the evening with reading. And what we really want to do is chat with those of you who are here, allow you to chat with us as well. And so if you have any questions throughout the evening, just pop them in the chat. We might not answer them right away if we're in the middle of a sentence or of a sip of wine, but we'll get them in good time. I don't think we need to leave them to the end if anything occurs to you and you'd like to bring something up. If you do want to bring anything up anonymously for some reason, if you have some sort of like deep dark question, you can also just direct message me, and I don't need to reveal your name and ask the question secretly on your behalf. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to David, who's going to talk a little bit about the first piece we're going to read, and then we'll read a couple of paragraphs, and we'll read them in the French and in English, since we are launching a translation, but we realize that most of you probably speak both. So David, je te passe la parole.
Thanks, Katia. So hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to see you tonight. I don't speak English really easily, so I will mix a kind of a French and English, and I think everybody will perfectly understand at the end. But I have a real discussion about literature only in English. It's not really easy for me, so it will be kind of mixed. So first, we will read a short section of a short story named in French La Ville Intérieure, and in English, The City Within. So it's a story, c'est une histoire à propos de quelqu'un qui, le soir, après ses journées de travail, à Montréal, descend dans une autre ville cachée sous la ville réelle, sous la ville montréalaise. Donc, on a à Montréal ce qu'on appelle la ville souterraine, hein, ce immense centre d'achat, ce réseau de couloirs qui relie différents lieux de la ville montréalaise. Mais or, dans ce texte-là, il y a une autre ville qui se déploie sous de très nombreux étages sous la ville montréalaise, qui est une sorte de reflet négatif du monde extérieur que va aller explorer le personnage nuit après son travail jusqu'à l'épuisement, rentrant dans des couloirs, découvrant des nouvelles pièces, se perdant, dormant à cet endroit-là, prenant un certain plaisir à le faire malgré le caractère parfois anxiogène de l'exploration. Donc, je lis un extrait. Oui.
Oui, vas-y,
je ne sais pas si Katia, tu veux ajouter quelque chose sur...
non, ben c'est ça, je pense que je peux en parler soit après ou soit maintenant. C'est ça, as David said, it's interesting actually. One of the guests we have in attendance tonight is actually my mother-in-law, or unless she's disappeared, who's from Buenos Aires. And I remember when she first came here, she's like, everybody in Buenos Aires thinks that there's like this actual underground city in Montreal, that there's actually this, like the whole, that in a bubble or some kind of weird futuristic thing from, Jetsons or something. And in fact, as David said, it's basically a shopping mall. It's basically like this long series of tunnels that takes you from the old port, I think, to Concordia. I'm not sure how far west you can go now. And so the story, as David said, is the story of this guy who goes down and is drawn to the labyrinth and to the dead ends and to the and I think it winds up being not only a negative space of the city, but also a negative space of what he is in the city, that kind of productive person with agency who makes decisions and does things for his own, as we do, for our own purposes. And he ends up being at the mercy of basically the random tunnels and walls and staircases and dead ends and trapdoors and stuff like this that he finds. So the section that we're going to read actually is just this one of the more absurd moments, I think, that he finds himself in. So, David, je te laisse lire la section en français, puis après je le fais en anglais.
Parfait. I just forgot to share my... So it's okay, you can see, vous pouvez voir l'extrait.
Oui, parfait.
Dans des parties reculées du 5e étage, l'eau s'écoule le long des murs. S'y trouvent des pièces inondées où je navigue sur des radeaux constitués de débris d'étagères, de tables et de chaises que j'ai cloués ou attachés les uns aux autres. Un projecteur éclaire un rectangle blanc sur un mur, mais aucun film n'y passe. Si la plupart des pièces de cette ville souterraine sont vides, on trouve des meubles dans certaines, témoignage d'une occupation plus ou moins récente. Et l'une d'elles, au 8e sous-sol, était-ce au 9e, contient une baignoire que j'ai trouvée pleine. L'eau était tiède, presque chaude, et je me suis plongé. J'entendais plus loin une goutte tomber et ailleurs un grincement discret, quasi inaudible. Les yeux fermés, j'ai mis ma tête sous l'eau. Seules mes lèvres et mon nez émergeaient. J'ai lentement respiré alors qu'autour de moi s'étendait la ville dont j'imaginais les pièces se répéter à l'infini et dont je croyais être le cœur. Au sortir de la baignoire, je me suis séché avec mon T-shirt comme s'il était agi d'une serviette et j'ai marché vers l'extérieur. Je n'ai jamais revu cette baignoire. Je te cède la parole, Katia, pour la version anglaise.
Super. Je prends l'écran, share screen, et voici donc la section, la version anglaise. Vous voyez tout mon écran? Oui, c'est bon. In remote parts of the 5th sub-basement, water dribbles down the walls. Some rooms are flooded, and I paddle across on rafts cobbled from pieces of shelves, tables, and chairs that I nail or tie together. A projector shines a white rectangle on a wall, but no film flickers. Most of the rooms in the underground city are empty, but some have furniture, evidence of more or less recent occupation. In one, in the 8th or maybe the 9th sub-basement, I once found a bathtub full. The water was warm, almost hot, and I slid in. Somewhere farther along, I could hear water falling drop by drop, and elsewhere, an almost inaudible squeak. I closed my eyes and I dropped my head under the surface, with only my lips and my nose above. I breathed slowly as the city radiated out around me, the rooms I imagined repeating endlessly with me at the center. I got out of the tub and dried myself, using my T-shirt as a towel, and walked outside. I never saw the bathtub again. So one of the reasons we chose this, David actually stopped over yesterday and we actually had a conversation en présentiel, which is delightful to sort of, and it was neat to go over some of this stuff because there's such a gap between the choosing of a book, the first reading when you first fall in love with it, and then as you make your way through the translation, you forget what the original was eventually. And then, you know, you submit it, it gets edited, and then it goes into this machine that you don't see. And the machine makes it a cover and it does things and it contacts sales reps and all this kind of stuff. And so it feels like it's a little bit farther away from, you know, when we were talking about it yesterday, it's actually nice to read it now. And it was nice to chat with you again about, you know, to rediscover these moments. And this City Within is such a weird story. And it's so exemplary of the of how deadpan the weirdness with which you write is. Donc j'ai vraiment l'impression en lisant tes romans et ton recueil aussi, qu'on est présenté avec quelque chose de surréel tellement souvent qu'on est censé prendre pour réel parce qu'il n'y a aucun autre indicateur de ce surréalisme. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to me that, like, we're just under the city. We're just in a bathtub. We're just, you know, there's a dead end. There's a guy who is a monkey. And so it's fascinating to me that you make these choices. It's not even magic realism. I mean, I guess it's closer to maybe like Cortázar or somebody than like there's no benchmarks of magic realism. And I wonder, I mean, obviously we write the way we write because that's how the world is in our heads. But I wonder how, like, where did this story come from, for example, this particular City Underground?
This story have a lot of different origin. Je vais en parler un peu en français. Il y a tout à l'heure, Katia parlait, par exemple, de cette image de la ville souterraine montréalaise qui disait que sa famille étrangère disait à Montréal, il y a un peu l'image d'une ville souterraine, d'une réelle ville souterraine exploratoire. Et moi, j'ai la famille qui vient de France et mes cousins qui venaient ici disaient toujours à Montréal, vous avez une ville souterraine. Et moi, qui venais de Sherbrooke, j'imaginais un dédale de tunnel quand j'étais enfant. est un peu reproduit ici. Mais ensuite, je pense que dans ce que tu décris, Katia, cette sorte d'étrangeté, cette forme de surréalisme qui est présentée comme si c'était normal, comme si c'était vrai, et qui en quelque sorte est normal et vrai, parce que dans la réalité, il y a réellement une étrangeté qui parfois nous dépasse. Il y a aussi une inspiration qui est très onirique, qui vient du monde du rêve. I take something in my dreams when I'm writing. Et j'essaie de présenter la réalité comme si elle n'était pas si différente du rêve, à brouiller les frontières entre le rêve et la réalité. De même que dans mes textes, je vais aussi brouiller les frontières entre l'humain et l'animal, entre la vie et la mort par moments, entre les individus même dans Frères, dans Brothers, les deux personnages principaux qui semblent être nés l'un de l'autre. Il y a cette idée-là ici de mettre un terme à des frontières entre les choses qui sont peut-être en partie fictives et qui créent cette étrangeté. Mais ensuite, quand j'écris, j'essaie de ne pas donner de ne pas expliquer, de ne pas trop expliquer. Je déteste les livres qui expliquent. I don't like when I have an explication, a real reason for everything in the books. I like a kind of mystery. And so I try to write the kind of book I want to read. So I'm not sure if
une question, ouais, c'est vraiment intéressant, mais dans ces cas-là, quand tu écris, if you're writing, and I agree, I don't like editorializing in books that I read either, because you feel like you're being brought to it as opposed to shown it. And so I wonder if I can ask, if it's not too invasive a question, what is your allegiance to then? Like, I wonder then, what is your, si la réalité n'est pas nécessairement n'est pas nécessairement ni un mur ni une obligation, si même l'intégrité de l'humain par rapport à lui ou elle-même, si même les lois de la physique parfois dans certains textes, les lois de la biologie certainement. Where does the buck stop? Like, what is your fidelity to then? If it's not reality or if physical sovereignty of individual people or.
I don't really know for me. I don't really know.
You haven't found it yet.
I'm a writer. I write what I think I have to write, and I rewrite and I write again. But I don't really know everything about the reason and for what I write this kind of stories. Oniric, a strange story. I think it's also politic stories. I think my books are also about the world where we live. Dans ce livre-là, il y a quand même aussi un discours critique dans cet onirisme-là, dans cette étrangeté-là du monde dans lequel nous vivons. On disait tout à l'heure que ce reflet de la ville-là, c'est un monde non utilitariste, où il n'y a pas l'univers de travail, où les personnages ne sont pas écrasés par le travail. C'est un monde où la dérive est possible. C'est un monde anxiogène, mais où la liberté est possible. Et je pense que ça a un sens. Et je pense que dans la fusion de l'humain et de l'animal qu'on retrouve dans d'autres textes comme le Hey Poutine ou le singe intérieur, il y a aussi une réflexion importante sur les frontières de l'humain et de l'animal, etc., qui vient modeler le texte. Mais c'est quoi la frontière? En fait, je ne suis pas vraiment capable de répondre à ta question. J'aimerais pouvoir répondre peut-être, mais ce serait du mensonge si je répondais trop clairement à ta question.
On attendra le prochain livre pour voir jusqu'où tu peux la repousser. What's interesting about that, though, is that all of your, whether it's the Singe Intérieur, the Ape Within, or this book, in this book, for example, there's a woman appears, so I'm going to make you want to buy the book now, Chercher la femme. There's a sense that we depend on that mainstream capitalist, consumerist, employable, etc. world, right? So in the Ape Within is the first story in the book. And it's a story of this guy who's a parking lot attendant, and then who becomes an ape. And his whole life is overtaken by that, including obviously his employability, as you might imagine. But we depend on that. We depend on the border. We depend on his job initially. We depend on his apartment becoming overgrown. And the same thing here. Even the two of them depend on food from the food courts above them. Like there's these food courts in Montreal's tunnels, right? And otherwise, when they live in this underground city, the city under the underground city, they can't eat without these kind of like styrofoam packaged, whatever, noodles and whatnot from the food court. So it's interesting that as much as there's a rebuttal or you refute that kind of the obligations to that world, you nonetheless, not you, but your characters, the worlds you imagine depend on them to some extent.
I think it's a book about escaping, the idea of escape. but it's about the possibility and the impossibility of escaping. So I'm not totally sure if I understand all the question, but I think it's going to be okay. C'est un livre sur la possibilité ou l'impossibilité d'échapper à sa vie, et je ne crois pas qu'il y ait de réponse. Je ne crois pas que mon livre va donner de réponse. Oui, comme tu le dis, ils échappent à la... In the Ape Within, le personnage essaie d'échapper au monde du travail, mais finalement, sa vie dégénère. J'aime pas les livres qui disent à la fin voici la solution, voici la lumière. C'est davantage des questions qui se posent. C'est des stratégies poétiques qui sont employées pour essayer d'échapper à un monde oppressif. Est-ce que je réponds un peu à la question? Ou je suis un peu...
Ouais, je pense que oui, c'est une observation, mais aussi plutôt peut-être plus qu'une question, mais tout à fait. Je pense que c'est il faut avoir pour pouvoir s'échapper, il faut avoir quelque chose de quoi on s'échappe, quoi.
Oui.
Il faut avoir un miroir, il faut avoir quelque chose de l'autre côté. There's a couple of questions. Karen's actually comparing this to Borges's Labyrinth, which is not, I mean, another escape, I think, in a way that Borges is also working through there. Je ne sais pas si est-ce que Borges était présent dans ta tête ou quand tu as écrit ça, c'est labyrinthe?
Oui, il y a quelque chose. C'est difficile d'écrire quoi que ce soit où on retrouve un labyrinthe en littérature sans penser à Borges. Et j'ai énormément lu cet auteur-là, donc il y a quelque chose, peut-être quelque chose de borgésien, mais de moins cérébral, peut-être, de plus intuitif dans cet univers-là. Mais Karen a tout à fait raison de créer montrer un parallèle. C'est un auteur que j'ai lu énormément et que je relis. Lorsque j'ai écrit To See Out the Night, Dormir sans tête, c'est ce moment où je lisais beaucoup les situationnistes, les internationales situationnistes. Et il y a beaucoup le refus du travail qui écrase l'individu, le refus d'un monde fondé sur l'utilitarisme, la nécessité de partir à la dérive, de prendre des chemins inhabituels, vient aussi beaucoup de lecture d'essais. C'est un moment aussi où je m'intéressais beaucoup aux avant-gardes, donc les situationnistes, les surréalistes, les dadaïstes. Et il y a beaucoup dans ce livre-là le sentiment que le monde est en train de s'écrouler, qu'il faut peut-être le balayer et construire autre chose. Et les personnages vont explorer des façons de reconstruire leur vie, mais avec des outils inattendus, avec des outils surréels, des outils fantastiques, des outils littéraires aussi, je pense. Voilà. Karen, est-ce que nous répondons à ta question?
Oui, merci.
On va reposer après avec grand plaisir. Karen est une spécialiste de ce livre, on peut presque dire. Katia, je peux te poser une question à mon tour.
Oui, bien sûr, vas-y.
Tu as déjà dit, il me semble, que tu as même écrit dans une question en répondant à Peter McCambridge à propos de mes livres, que j'ai traduit deux de mes livres, que tu croyais t'y reconnaître et que ces livres-là t'habitaient en quelque sorte. Autant Brothers, donc nous avons To See Out the Night, nous avons Brothers, le premier livre. Et j'aimerais savoir en quoi, est-ce que c'est vrai et en quoi c'est le cas? Est-ce que tu sais pourquoi? Tu peux répondre en anglais ou en français comme tu le souhaites.
Ben oui, tout à fait. C'est intéressant. Je ne sais pas si d'autres parmi vous, Blossom, Karen, Amy, Robin, les autres membres du public aussi, qui lisaient ou qui faites n'importe quoi. Dans le fond, je pense que des fois, on participe à des œuvres d'art, non seulement en tant que public, mais en tant qu'interlocuteur aussi. Et il y en a certaines qu'on garde avec nous. On commence par exemple, je sais pas, on regarde une série télévisée ou quelque chose qui est vraiment, qui embarque dans notre tête, et puis on commence à parler comme les personnages, quelque chose d'aussi simple que ça. In the case of To See Out the Night, more, it was very much the images that got me. In the case of Brothers, it was the language. It was there was a kind of the rhythm. There was a breathlessness. There was this kind of this frantic quality to many of the moments, many of the scenes, and so it was so easy to translate because it felt like I'd had to reproduce the words. That had to kind of come out of me. They were already inside me, basically, if that makes sense. With To See Out the Night, with Dormir sans tête, it was much more about the images. And so I'd be like walking along, just ran to go to the dep or something. And all of a sudden I would, the way I don't know, do people do this? I would narrate my life. I'd be like, oh yeah. And so like the sidewalk is like growing something. You know how your real world, you're going to the dep world, becomes just the bruit de fond for what's actually important. Actually, this weirdness that takes over your mind. And so, as those of you who are translators who are here with us tonight will know this, sometimes when you translate someone, you really have to put on their words like a shirt, and you have to make it fit, and sometimes it fits better than others, and then sometimes it's like you're taking off the thing, and it feels like it's revealing you to yourself. And so the stories in this book and Brothers to a large extent felt very right. It felt like you're on a blind date with a book when someone asks you to translate it, or when you read it, and sometimes you take the book home with you, right? And so it feels like, but this one was very much more about images, especially this one. This story I thought was really compelling because of the way that it traces the city under the city, or within the city, literally. And then some stories were très frappantes. Il y a une histoire Yamashi, c'est une histoire qui est vraiment qui est certaines histoires qui sont plus violentes que d'autres, disons, et qui viennent vraiment nous chercher comme être humain. Il y a aussi des histoires en tant que lectrice. Mon histoire préférée, c'est To My Tumor with Love. This love letter that you have to buy this book. You have to read this book, either in French or in English. As a reader, I love that one. As a reader, there's this kind of punchline, and it's playful, and it's sad, and it finds the loveliness in sadness. But as a translator, the one I liked best was Sukumi, which I think on allait lire une section d'un autre. Je sais pas si on a le temps de lire un autre paragraphe, je pense. So this is a story. It's really interesting. It's set in and around the McGill ghetto in the present day, a couple of years ago, actually. It's very specifically located at a time when there was a big car accident on the 40 here, a truck that hit it. I forget exactly what happened, but I could see the cloud from here. I think a car flipped over and caught on fire, if I remember correctly. And simultaneously, at the Institute, the Primate Institute of Experimental Pathology and Therapy in Sukumi, at a time when when Eastern Europe is imploding, basically. And what I like about the story as a translator is that I get to go back to a lot of David's pet themes. Monkeys, namely, kind of this inhabitation of the human by the animal, and vice versa, by the human animal, and it feels like it's the end of the world a little bit, but not. I mean, at this launch I was at earlier tonight for Martine Delvau's latest book, that's a book about climate change, but she had this great. She said as she was introducing it, "C'est fin du monde qui n'en est pas une." Which feels, this is what Sukumi feels like to me. It's like we're waiting for it, and it doesn't come, and so we have to make do with the apocalypse again. Donc on allait lire une petite section. Je sais pas si tu veux lire en premier le premier paragraphe. Après je peux lire. Après on verra. Il y a une autre question. Puis on peut peut-être voir s'il y a d'autres gens qui veulent aussi venir de l'avant.
Très bien. So, Sukumi, en fait, est une ville donc, sur le bord de la mer Noire, en Abkhazie, une région sécessionniste géorgienne, où se trouvait pendant longtemps le plus grand laboratoire d'études des singes. Il y avait plusieurs milliers de singes qui se trouvaient là. Et le texte se passe donc simultanément à McGill, à Montréal, aux années 2010, et à Sukumi à la fin des années 90. Je vais donc lire le premier paragraphe. La première fois que j'ai rencontré Spiroberg en rêve, je ne sais pas si c'était lui qui rêvait à moi ou le contraire, et le doute persista durant les nombreux mois où je le retrouvais presque chaque nuit durant mon sommeil. Spiroberg vivait à la fin des années 80, et moi dans la deuxième décennie des années 2000. J'ignorais ainsi si je rêvais au passé ou si c'était lui qui rêvait à l'avenir. Il me semblait parfois que nous nous retrouvions dans un espace intermédiaire entre sa vie et la mienne. C'est bien, quand je relis ces passages, je suis fier de ce que j'ai fait. Ça n'arrive pas toujours, mais là, je me dis, c'est pas mal. Mais la version de Katia est par ailleurs excellente aussi, et tout aussi, elle peut en être fière aussi. Je la laisse vous la lire.
Merci, tu es gentil. So this is Sukumi is as David said, is a town on the Black Sea, and there's a few real characters in this story, but it's kind of incidental that they're real because reality has no bearing on reality as it happens. So Sukumi. The first time I met Spiroberg in a dream, I didn't know if he was dreaming about me or the other way around. He came to me in my sleep every night for months, and I was never sure who was dreaming of whom. Spiroberg was from the late 1980s. I was living in the second decade of the next millennium. I didn't know if I was dreaming about the past or whether he was dreaming about the future. We were in a liminal space between his life and mine. And then, est-ce qu'on veut lire la deuxième section qu'on voulait lire aussi, peut-être, sans cahier?
Allons-y. Ce sera donc la dernière lecture. Après ça, on va
jaser.
On va jaser. Faut que je retrouve c'était où. C'est une page après. Ici.
Yeah.
Le temps passé à Soukoumi. Spiroberg semblait de plus en plus inquiet. Il paraissait fatigué, se désintéressait de la science, manifestait davantage d'affection pour les singes, comme s'il craignait de les perdre. Nous ne marchions plus sur la plage, restions au sanctuaire où on aurait cru qu'il s'enfermait. Ses gestes étaient fébriles, son regard souvent m'évitait. Quand il m'accompagnait au musée Red Pat, nous voyions des singes assis sur des balustrades ou réunis dans le ventre préhistorique du Gorgosaurus libratus, semblant s'y réfugier, fuir la réalité de Spiroberg pour rejoindre la mienne. Dans l'Abkhazie qu'il habitait, c'était déjà le début des années 90. Désormais, des milices armées parcouraient Soukoumi. La Géorgie avait proclamé son indépendance après la chute de l'URSS et les Abkhazes réclamaient l'autonomie à leur tour. Les troupes géorgiennes approchaient de la frontière. Déjà, des chercheurs fuyaient pour rejoindre le sanctuaire, pour rejoindre Sochi. Le soleil brûlait sur le Caucase. Les chants nationalistes retentissaient dans la ville.
Bon, je prends mon tour. Donc, je vais lire la même section en anglais. Here we go. Time passed in Sukhumi too. Spiroberg seemed increasingly worried. He looked tired. He lost all interest in science and showed more affection for the monkeys, as if he were afraid of losing them. We no longer walked on the beach. We stayed at the Institute. It seemed like he was locking himself in. His gestures were spastic and he wouldn't look me in the eye. When he came to the Red Path Museum with me, we would see monkeys sitting on the railings or hanging out in the prehistoric rib cage of the Gorgosaurus libratus, sheltering there, escaping from Spiroberg's reality to mine. In Abkhazia, where he lived, it was already the beginning of the 90s. It was already the beginning of the 90s. Armed militias roved through Sukhumi. Georgia had proclaimed independence after the fall of the USSR, and the Abkhazians demanded sovereignty too. Georgian troops were approaching the border. Already, researchers from the Institute were making a break for Sochi. And I'll stop there, I think, and we'll go over to some of the questions that we have, if that's okay. So feel free to add your questions in the chat. We'll answer them maybe in order of most direct to widest. We should go in chronological order, I guess, actually. So Corey, who's a friend of mine from high school, actually, has a question about the translation process and whether it was impacted by the fact that we couldn't meet in person. I don't remember when we started translating this book. Actually, you know what? No, I do remember. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic that I was kind of getting into it. And so immediately when the pandemic struck, David, tu m'avais écrit un courriel disant on est rendu où personne n'avait rien, tu n'avais rien à faire, mais j'avais les deux enfants à la maison tout d'un coup. And the conversation with David saying like, oh, let's do this thing. And I was like, oh my God, I have 2 kids at home and I can't do anything. Mais on s'était rencontrés avant ça, puis je pense qu'on avait une complicité qui était déjà établie. And so the absentiel présentiel switch it didn't feel like an imposition at all. Mm-hmm. And then last January, I think, or February, we had this wonderful opportunity with Catherine Nego, who's a translator also and filmmaker, to put together this bilingual reading outside, of course, and with masks, and like it was this really weird pandemic montage of a reading from one of the stories. So I'll try to find the link afterwards and I'll put it in the chat because it was a pretty cool way to see each other and to be around people after, like 9 months of not being with anybody at all. Mais je sais pas si toi t'aurais aimé, est-ce que t'aurais préféré qu'on se rencontre 15 fois par année? Tu enseignais aussi, je pense, donc ça aurait été un peu compliqué.
À ce moment-là, je pense que j'enseignais pas, j'écrivais à temps plein un autre livre, mais Katia était en contact avec moi de façon régulière par courriel et elle m'envoyait chacune des nouvelles après les avoir traduites. Je lis mieux l'anglais que je le parle, je vous rassure. Et on avait des échanges très, très courants sur la nouvelle et sur des questions autant aussi, Katia est poète en rapport au langage qui est particulier et qui est intéressant, et sur la rythmique aussi autant que sur le sens. Hein. Est-ce qu'ici ça coule, est-ce qu'ici, etc. Avec beaucoup de questions de fond, de détails. Les échanges ont été très, très réguliers par courriel tout au long de l'écriture de ce livre, peut-être plus encore qu'avec Brothers, qu'avec Frères, où il y avait des questions plus finale. Je pense que comme chaque
Oui.
nouvelle envoie un univers particulier,
Ouais.
c'est compliqué.
Et certaines plus que d'autres. Il y avait certaines nouvelles qui avaient peut-être 15-20 courriels à propos
Ouais.
des 3 mots et d'autres qui en avaient d'autres qui passaient comme dans le
We have a
Kafka.
difficult discussion about the title with Peter too. So
Yeah, that was it.
how translate dormir sans tête? And it's a good idea to translate dormir sans tête literally, or the best literally it's have a new title. I don't know what Karen thinks about the to see out the night, because I know she know dormir sans tête or the people, but I really like this title too. I think is in the spirit of the book.
But I remember
agree.
one of the things that was important to you too was to not call it The Ape Within and Other Stories, but to have a title that put it forward as a collection.
Mm-hmm. And I have the same discussion with my French publisher first. The question was it could be Le Singe Intérieur, but I said I don't know how to say coherence, the logic in the book, and it's not only a story and other stories. All the stories are in relation in this book. So the books need a title pour réunir l'histoire.
Yeah. And the other title feels perfect to me. Though for a long time we tried to find a title with a head in it or something to something kind of cephalic in it, that proved to be impossible. There's a couple of other questions. So thank you, Corey. Karen also asked us to discuss the space of writing as liminal, which I think that's kind of giant. No, that's. Do you want to elaborate on that, Karen?
I just feel that each of the stories is a world in itself, but there's a sense that the writing creates this space, but it's neither real nor is it unreal. So I think that's where surrealism comes in, because you are creating this world through écriture, and it's this sort of where the real and unreal meet, where you have dreams and desire and you're creating something. So I find that liminal is this kind of space where I guess where signs meet sense. I'm reading Roland Barthes right now, so I have semiology on my brain. So this is kind of where this écriture question came up. But I love what happens in the stories in terms of becoming, in terms of humans meeting space between the human and the animal, or between the body and the tumor. So I find, for me anyway, I'm answering the question that liminal is kind of where it's at for me.
I think what makes it literature as opposed to just nonsense, so is that tension that exists in that liminal space, right, between the real or whatever, between one side of the equation and the literary side of the equation. So either like if you want to go from Barthes to maybe to like Todorov, you can go for like for the tension between the lyric and the narrative, but I think the tension between those two things, that's what makes that liminal space so fraught, right?
Yeah.
And interesting and compelling.
Definitely the tension, and absolutely the tension. The tension, and what am I going to say? The logic.
Can I chip in?
The logic. Yes, please, Peter.
I'm just thinking the word tension is interesting, because we talked earlier about the space between the real and the unreal, and I know you've read him too, Eric Dupont, Karen.
Yes.
Because he has very much the same tension between real and unreal, but he takes us in a completely different direction. Like he takes us towards magic realism, whereas this is more towards surrealism, I suppose. But I find it just interesting because there is this dynamic in both authors' writing, but it takes us very, very different places. This is kind of, I don't know, there's something unsettling about it, whereas there's something almost reassuring about Eric's grandmothers who don't die and people who keep coming back, living for generations after generations, and witches flying through the air on broomsticks and stuff. It's not cartoonish, but it's less grimy, it's less in the city. Maybe that's the difference too. His books tend to be set in the countryside and in childhood, whereas this is dirty.
David Clerson does not want to reassure you.
No, it's like, it's a bit of like, it's a sort of love affair with a kind of, I want to say monstrosity, but I mean it in a nice way, like creating something new that doesn't exist, but that you want to exist, and really taking you into something new and non-pre-existing, but it's pushing the boundaries, like between the human and the ape. There is a continuum, right? So it's the logic. What I love is the logic of this. You're just pushing and pushing this logic of becoming this other thing and creating this new creature. I guess creature, not monster.
I like your idea, the create a new thing. When I'm writing a short story or a novel, I'm never I said before, it will be a fantastic story, or it will be a surreal story. It will be a surrealistic story. Never I think before, it will be, je fais cela. I just think I have a story to tell, and I will try to broke the border, to create a new kind of new things. But I don't have the real idea of the surrealistic or the fantastic or the surreal. I think it's other things, and it's also a kind of idea of kind of the not a real a vision of the future, but in kind of the poetic vision of the future, and also of today. I try to. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm. Peut-être je suis complètement dans le champ, mais j'explore. C'est des explorations. Et quand tu parles de ces nouvelles sortes de créatures, je pense que dans l'humain tumeur, j'aime beaucoup le titre anglais de Katia, de la nouvelle. Je vois le bon livre.
My Tumor with Love.
My Tumor with Love. Il y a l'exploration d'une sorte d'humanité malade, mais l'humanité malade où la maladie devient presque belle. Et je pense que c'est un peu la New Things. Et il y a beaucoup l'idée là-dedans, peut-être sous-jacente, de présenter positivement ce qui est négatif. L'itinérance dans de Hey Poutine, c'est l'itinérance, mais l'itinérance est positive dans de Hey Poutine en partie. Dans ce texte-là, la maladie est presque positive. Dans Brothers, la mutilation, l'infirmité est presque positive. Donc, la nouveauté vient aussi de cette transformation de la déchéance ou du négatif en quelque chose de positif. Je pense que ça a quand même un sens aussi derrière tout ça.
Est-ce qu'on peut en profiter pour en fait sauter aux questions de Robin par rapport à, oui, l'inspiration des histoires, mais aussi la question des sans-abri. Donc, Robin te pose la question, David, tu as été en Géorgie, donc pour les Sukumi, mais il demande aussi, tu le vois dans le chat, Montreal has a lot of homeless, et The Ape Within donc commence vraiment avec une personne, cet homme qui est dans le garage souterrain, donc, et qui est sans abri. Je ne sais pas de ça a inspiré l'histoire. Est-ce qu'il y a un moment où c'était venu à cause de la présence justement de personnes qui sont en situation d'itinérance à Montréal?
Deux choses différentes. Donc, oui, je suis allé en Géorgie. Donc, je suis allé à Tbilissi, en Géorgie. Je suis aussi allé à plusieurs reprises sur le bord de la mer Noire, en Bulgarie, en Turquie, etc. Mais je ne suis jamais allé à Sukhumi même. Par contre, j'ai beaucoup lu sur Sukhumi, j'ai vu plusieurs documentaires sur cet endroit-là. J'ai utilisé beaucoup aussi Google Maps, qui est une sorte d'outil d'écrivain très utile. Mais il y a quand même une partie du paysage que que je connais. J'ai l'impression que les lieux me sont très familiers. Et j'ai vu des fabuleux documentaires sur cet endroit-là et sur le sanctuaire des singes qui a été détruit pendant la guerre et les centaines de singes qui se sont enfuis en forêt derrière, qui est un sujet qui me vient à mon deuxième livre, mais peu importe. Et la question de l'itinérance, je ne me souviens pas, I don't really remember what I was thinking about when I first start writing the I put in. First, when I start writing a short story or a novel, in fact, I have not really an idea, sometimes just an image, and kind of view. Okay, I write up with this view. But, mais un de mes amis m'avait raconté une fois qu'un soir de Noël, il avait laissé rentrer un itinérant dormir dans un stationnement où il travaillait et que l'itinérant avait déféqué dans le stationnement. Ce qui se passe dans ma nouvelle. Et il y a une sorte de reconnaissance de l'itinérant dont la vie devient parallèle aussi, son errance avec celle des derniers singes qui disparaissent, etc. Mais je n'ai pas de réflexion réelle sur l'itinérance, mais je suis très sensible aux gens qui sont dans la rue. Des fois, je pense que je peux comprendre qu'on va être dans la rue. Je pense que des fois, il y a des gens pour qui c'est une forme de choix presque. Pas toujours. Que l'errance, c'est quelque chose de beau, que l'instabilité, quelque chose de belle aussi. Qu'on peut voir l'aspect positif dans ce que c'est négatif aussi. Je pense que cet imaginaire-là me parle. Mais voilà.
Et peut-être qu'on peut passer, je te pose la question, David, de Pablo Strauss. Hi, Pablo, I don't think I saw you. I didn't see you because you're a gray rectangle. Hi, Pablo. So Pablo Strauss has the following question. To me, is it easier to translate a second book by David? Et toi, David, donc, est-ce que d'être traduit, is it easier the second time around, having been through it once and knowing me? So, est-ce que c'est plus facile la deuxième fois? Comment tu l'as vécu, le processus d'être traduit? Est-ce que ça t'a... Est-ce que tu...
En fait, deux choses. Je suis très content que les deux livres soient traduits par toi parce que j'aime ton travail et j'aime l'idée d'une filiation, d'une continuation, une sorte de cohérence qui se perd des fois. Je pense qu'on parle de traducteur en traducteur. Et je commence à mieux connaître ton travail et j'aime de voir cela. Et j'ai un immense plaisir à relire mes livres en anglais parce que je redécouvre l'histoire. Mais on dirait que c'est avec un sentiment d'étrangeté, de familiarité et d'étrangeté. J'ai l'impression, des fois, de comprendre ce que je n'avais pas compris sur ce que j'avais écrit ou de ressentir des choses différentes par d'autres aspects. Je trouve ça extrêmement riche. Et je pense que tu as un sens du langage et du rythme qui est très important, qui vient chercher parce que lorsque j'écris, il y a l'histoire, mais je pense que moi, je retravaille mes textes à répétition, je les lis à voix haute, je travaille la rythmique. Et je pense que ça a autant d'importance que ce que ça raconte. Et j'ai l'impression que tu es sensible à ça dans ton rapport au langage et que ça vient bien traduire. Ça transforme un peu, bien sûr, parce que je pense que la traduction, c'est aussi une transformation. Mais que tu t'amènes très bien. Je suis très content qu'il y ait cette forme de continuité qui existe, que j'espère voir se perpétuer.
Moi aussi, tout à fait. Je pense que c'est comme toute relation, dans le fond, une fois que tu connais mieux la personne, c'est plus facile, right? A kind of shorthand settles in. And so the questions you're asking are answered faster because you know what you're halfway to the person already because you know them better. But certainly, c'est intéressant ce que tu dis à propos d'écrire à voix haute, de te relire à voix haute dans le processus de révision, parce que une des choses que j'ai fait avec plusieurs des nouvelles ici et avec Brothers aussi, c'est que je les traduis à voix haute. Et le rythme, surtout Brothers était tellement verbal pour moi, tellement oral, oral, que ça c'est rentré comme ça et c'est sorti comme ça aussi. Donc, je pense que ça paraît ou ça a paru pour moi. There's another question too by Peter that is not asked in the chat, but I'd be curious, Peter, to know what it is that you want to ask about nature.
Yeah,
Sorry, Pablo, does that answer your question, Pablo? We'll assume yes.
Well, assume yes.
Go ahead.
Hi, Pablo.
Go ahead, Peter.
No, it was something that struck me earlier on when we were talking. We were talking about the characters escaping the city. But it's not just the city, they're trying to escape nature too in some of the other stories, aren't they? It's not as though the solution to life in the dirty city is to leave the city and go to nature. And that was one of the things I wanted to include on the cover design.
No solution.
There's no solution. There's no way out. It's it's not this wall. So on the cover design, we're not sure if the spikes we're looking at are blades of grass, if they're natural, or if they're blades of steel. We're not sure if they're the problem or the solution, if they're from the city or from nature. But I was just wondering what you're trying to say about nature in the book then, if it's not the solution, it's part of the problem.
I don't really know. I try to have a reflection. I don't know if it's a reflection, but I try to write story where the frontier between nature and unnatural is not broken, but brouillé, flou. I don't know which word I could use in English. I think it's a reflection we have to have now in the world where we live, the reflection between humanity and nature, humanity and animals, and also is the same frontier with life and death. When you walk in the wood, you are always in this walking on this frontier, because you walk on sur le sol en putréfaction, les feuilles, etc., qui sont la mort, mais qui sont la vie ou ça renaît, etc. Ça vient sans arrêt. And me in my life, I'm always I really love living in the city, but I always have the idea of escape of the city and being in the world, being alone. I love being alone in the world. I write a lot of time in a small cottage in the world. But it's not really a real escape, because you cannot be well everywhere, perfectly well everywhere. I think fuir la ville pour aller à la campagne, c'est pas une solution. Revenir en ville, c'est pas une solution. Ce qui veut pas dire que je suis mal à ces endroits-là. Je suis bien partout. Mais le passage de l'autre est intéressant. Puis je pense que la ville et la forêt, en réalité, des fois, se ressemblent aussi. Il y a pas, c'est des mondes qu'on sépare de façon dichotomique ou dualiste, mais que la frontière entre les deux est aussi des fois à revoir, et que c'est pas si que la forêt est un peu une ville, la ville est un peu une forêt aussi, tout comme pour dans le Hey Poutine, pour le personnage, elle devient un peu une jungle, et etc. I don't know if I answered the question. I don't know if Katia have something to say about this question.
No, except that I think we should buy a cottage together and do a timeshare. So before perhaps I do a last round for questions, I want to remind you that the book is available for purchase on the QC Fiction website. So the link is in the chat, and at all better indie bookstores near you. So I invite you to go and grab a copy, sit down and read it. Read it in the French if you can, in the English if you'd like. It's a pleasure to translate you every time, David. It's a pleasure to work with you, Peter, and Robin, and Blossom. Thank you so much for hosting this. I think we have time for a couple other questions. I don't think the Zoom is going to kick us out quite yet. So if anybody else has any questions about either the book, in French, in English, liminal spaces, nature, monkeys, metamorphosis. David is an expert on metamorphosis. Now's the time.
Are you working on anything at the minute, David? Are you writing more short stories or another novel?
Yes, but my new books is near to be finished. But now I'm working too much this fall, so I will finish in January. But I hope next year I will have a new short story. It's not really short story. It's not really a novel. It's between a short story and novel. But and it will be with a lot of reference link with brothers and to see all the nights and en rampant my other books. So it will be a kind of comment on fait c'est sorry, I'm retired today. I have teach a lot. Toile, comment ça?
Web.
Web. Ben oui, le web, ouais, c'est facile. Maybe it will be my best books. Maybe.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Sounds great.
Maybe.
Kafka meets, I don't know, something.
Yep. Listen, it's 8 o'clock. I think I'll wrap it up. I just want to thank a few people before I forget to thank people that I should be thanking. So thanks to David and to Heliotrope, the French publisher, for their confidence in QC Fiction. Thanks to Katia for posing the questions tonight and giving great answers too, and for being such a reliable, interesting translator and being a pleasure to work with generally. I hope this book is a lot of success, and I hope there's good things to come for it. Thanks to Robin and Baraka Books for being there for QC Fiction, for all their support, for organising the lunch. Thanks to Blossom Tom for coordinating the lunch, to Jan Jorgensen for enabling it with her Zoom account, and thanks to everyone for coming. Thanks to everyone. Have a good
Thanks, Peter, too. Thanks, everybody. So I will not repeat all the list, but I'm very happy this second book is published by Québec Fiction in the translation, in the Katia translation.
I also want to thank you. I sometimes think we should have these launches, say, a month or two before the book comes out, because it will get more people hearing you talk about it and Katia translating it. And it sort of would helps us defend the book even more, because you can read it, but your explanation of where it comes from and your thoughts, it helps us appreciate the job and the work that you both put into it. So we'll do that next time.
Okay, like you all.